Hey folks, David here on the Vintage Future, and today I want to talk to you about boot break-in, maybe give you some tips on breaking in your boots, dispel some myths, especially if you're just getting into boots. This is a really important topic, right? Because you hear all these conflicting opinions and statements that are unqualified and you don't know what they mean, right? So one guy will get a new pair of boots and he'll say, man, the break-in was virtually non-existent. And another guy will get a new pair of boots and he'll say, man, the break-in was brutal. And you're kind of wondering what to do with that. Well, I've been thinking about this because I've got this pair of Grant Stone brass boots that I've been breaking in for a few weeks now, and I'm going to be releasing the 1 month update review and then a 6 month review later. And as I've been breaking these in, I've realized, man, there's probably so much about break-in that especially a beginner is not going to be aware of. And so I want to tell you what is break-in and what are some tips on breaking in your boots. I think if I explain what break-in is, it might help you better understand what is going on with the break-in and kind of demystify a lot of it. So let's jump in. So the first thing is I always start at the bottom, and so I'm going to do that this time too. So first, when you're breaking in a boot, you're starting here with the outsole. So what's happening is the biggest thing is you're forming a flex point. So that's right across the ball of your foot where your toes intersect with the rest of your foot. So you're going to be training the boot to bend like that. You know, unless you walk flat. Some people walk like a penguin. It's just like, choop, choop, choop. But most people, they walk and it's kind of like this. It bends right there. So you want to form that flex point, and whatever the sole is, it's going to have to start bending there. This is very cushy. This is EVA foam, so it's going to be soft. But different boots have different kinds of soles. So like these Vibergs have a day-night sole. It's like a little bit harder rubber. Granted, it's not as thick. If this was a V100 Vibram sole, like on my Nix Builder Pros or something, it'd be very hard to bend. But that's the first thing you're doing, is you're getting some bend in there. So now we're done with the outsole. That's pretty much all there is to breaking in an outsole. The next part is the midsole. Right here, this leather right here, that's the midsole. Now, every midsole is different in every boot, but with this kind of boot, it's usually veg tan leather. Sometimes there's a cork filler, like the cork in a wine bottle, like cork filler. And then there'll be a shank in there. There's wood shanks, hard leather shanks, fiberglass shanks, metal shanks, ribbed metal shanks. Anyways, what a shank is, it's this like 2-3 inch long by like 1 inch wide, flat, sometimes a little curved structural piece that gets placed embedded in that midsole area at about this location on the boot, like kind of where the arch of your foot would be, right here, and that adds some extra support. So that midsole with the cork and the leather and maybe a shank, that all has to settle. So the first thing that's happening is everything's compressing and settling. The cork is settling, the cork is compressing, it's settling around that shank. If the shank is softer, like a wooden shank or a leather shank, it might start bending or compress itself. If it's metal, it's probably not going to bend a whole lot or whatever, but there's definitely some flexing and compressing going on in there, and that's part of the break-in. To give you an example, so I have these White Cloud inserts that they're Battle Assy leather, and then there's cork on the bottom side. I cut it to size because I wanted it to be a 3/4. Originally it was a full length, but here's a picture of them when they were new. So you can see what the cork looks like, kind of. You know, the cork was much higher. You know, now it has been compressed because the weight of my foot has pushed it down. So as I show you this, like you can kind of see the contour of my foot, right? So it's taking the shape of my foot and it's getting compressed. So it's very hard. So think of it this way. A cork in a wine bottle. The part that's outside the bottle is still relaxed, right? But the part that's shoved into the wine bottle, it's compressed to get into the nozzle, the opening of that wine bottle, right? So it's much harder because it's been pushed together to be more dense, right? And so that's what's happening. So it's the same kind of cork, but it's inside this midsole. And so that's compressing. It's compressing around that shank. And imagine this is the footbed. This is the midsole and the insole that you're stepping on. Well, your foot, imagine this is the foot, it's pushing in on it as well, creating an indentation, like an imprint of your foot. Just like if you stepped on sand at the beach, You know, you put your foot in the sand and move your foot, and there's this imprint. You can tell there's a footprint of where your foot was. Well, in that hard leather and in that cork or foam, sometimes it's like pour on or something, but your foot is pushing down as you use this boot, and you're breaking it in, breaking it in, breaking it in, and you're forming an imprint of your foot in that. So that's happening during break-in as well. And then lastly, with the sole, outsole, midsole, insole, there's what's called a heel seat. Some people might even call it a heel pad, but it's right here inside what your heel sits on. That's usually in a boot like this, you know, it's usually like a little bit of leather with some foam underneath, and then maybe under that another layer of leather or some other synthetic material with an adhesive on it. But that also is forming to your foot. Okay, so now we've covered the bottom of the boot. This is the whole foundation. The sole is like the foundation. If we're talking houses, it's like we've dealt with the foundation. Now let's talk about the rest of the house. The first thing is that flex point. Whether it's the midsole, outsole, the vamp right here, it's this flex point where the ball of your foot flexes. So all of that has to learn to flex. What's happening with all this creasing that's going on is not that the leather's really stretching. Leather does have a little give to it. There's this complex system of fibers that make up the flesh, the leather, and you know, they have a little give to them for sure. You know, it's not like we're dealing with steel here. You know, it is skin of an animal, so it has some give to it. But leather like this grade of leather doesn't really stretch per se. You know, it's not like some saran wrap or a rubber band where like it starts out 1 inch and you can stretch it like 3 inches. There's an illusion of it stretching as it breaks in, but I'm going to explain what that is. So what happens is when the boot starts out, it's more like this, right? It's more like that because it hasn't been used before. So everything's just perfect. There's no creases or anything. As this creases, so if I push this down, you'll notice the leather here will push towards you, right? Like if I push the top of the boot, then this kind of ends up with some slack, right? So that's kind of what's happening. As I bend this, you can see it really well here. See this right here? As I bend the boot here, it causes slack to form, some material to push out to the side here. That's extra material, which creates slack, looseness, and the slack enables the rest of the boot to do what it needs to do to form around your foot. And that's the main idea here. When your boot is breaking in, basically all that is to say is the leather is forming around your foot. So when I do this, this has extra, so then now this quarter can pull up if it needs to, which is why often like when you first get your boots, the quarters are like out here, and then you'll notice over a few months' time as you begin to wear them, they get closer and closer together, and sometimes they even almost touch if you have a low volume ankle or foot. And that's because you've given the quarter slack here so it can pull this way. Whereas when the boot's like new and tight like this, the quarter can't pull up and away, right? So anyways, that's going on. It's forming to your foot. If, let's say you have a protruding knuckle here, like a bunion or something. Well, on the inside of the boot, you know, it's going to push out, right? That part of your foot's going to push out on the boot. So the boot isn't stretching, but watch. Here, when I push this, you'll see the whole vamp kind of move. Like when I push, see the whole vamp is moving? Now, it's not as drastic as I'm showing you, right? Obviously, you know, it's not all crazy like that. But in a subtle way, like if you were to really observe closely, your foot is pushing this whole vamp over a little bit. And it's basically, imagine it's like this team of guys working and they're all talking to each other like, I need a little slack over here. And then one of the guys is like, okay, well, I got some extra that I don't need over here. We'll push it your way. Especially in a high volume last like this. There's a high wall last. In other words, the sides of it are really tall. Like right here, it's not really low. Like this one's low. Like look at them together. You can see how much taller this brass boot is, right? So something like this, there's so much extra material that there's usually something, some material that can go to the aid of a place that's kind of stressed. So that's happening here in the toe box. Right here across the instep, the seam where this tongue is stitched to the vamp, that's often an area where you get what's called bite, where it's like feels like it's cutting into the top of your foot or just pushing uncomfortably into the top of your foot. You know, you get a burning sensation because the top of your foot is very tender. Well, same thing. Not only will it kind of give and push out this way, you know, giving your foot more vertical clearance, but as the rest of this vamp loosens up from these creases, what's happening is, you know, you do this, gives you extra material to push up this way, right? You go like this, it pushes the material up, so there's more material there. Anyways, so these kinds of things are happening in addition to the fact that the leather is relaxing a little bit. It's stretching ever so slightly, maybe just has a little give in it. Now we got to talk about the shaft. Okay, so the shaft is also breaking in, and the tongue is too, but the tongue's really flimsy, so we don't really need to talk much about that. But it does need to form to your foot just like the rest of the boot. But the shaft does too, because when it first is put on, it doesn't want to cooperate, right? It doesn't want to go where you want it to go. So if you need to bend your ankle this direction, it doesn't want to go. It resists. And you want to bend this direction, it doesn't want to go either. It resists. There's no creases here yet. It doesn't know what to do. And if you want to bend back, the boot needs to go like this, forming these creases here. But at the beginning, it's just like kind of sturdy. Or if you want to bend forward, right? Bend forward, it needs to learn to do that. And so you need to form all these creases. And that's what's happening there. You need to form all those creases, and it just takes time. Just takes patience. This is a kind of thick leather. I've got Chrome XL boots, and Chrome XL is kind of soft, really. It's very forgiving, which is why it's a good first boot leather, if it's your first boot. This is a lot thicker. This is Badalassi Minerva leather from the Badalassi Tannery in Italy, and it's almost more cardboardy, not in a cheap way. I just mean it's like the difference between paper and cardstock. It's really cardy. And so it's going to be more rigid, more resistant, more dense. It's not going to want to cooperate. So a break-in on a boot like this is going to take longer. And the next part of break-in is the counter. The counter in here is going to have a certain shape to it, right? Now, if that happens to be pretty much the shape of your heel already, break-in will be pretty easy. But if the shape of your heel is much different from the heel counter, you know, that could pose some issues. But don't worry. As long as you have a boot like this that has a leather heel counter inside here, that leather heel counter, just like this leather, is going to mold to your heel, right? In the same way that the vamp molds to the front of your foot, the leather heel counter will mold to the back of your foot. You just got to give it time. This is going to be something that doesn't take as long in hotter months or if you live in a hot climate, because it's heat and friction that helps that leather form. If you live in a really cold place or it's a cold season where you're at, it could take longer. But nevertheless, it's the friction of your heel in the counter pocket rubbing, causing friction and heat so that that thing begins to form. I don't know if this is actually objectively true, but anecdotally, it seems like a boot that has lining in it with an internal heel counter like this one. So this one has an external heel counter. You can tell because of this piece here. Right, this piece, they put the counter on, they slap the counter on the back of the boot, and then this holds it on. Whereas this one doesn't have that, it's just a back strip right here. And then you can see stitching from where the counter is inside. They put the counter inside, and then they take this lining and they put it over the top of that. They drape it over and adhere it with adhesive to the back inside of the boot, right here. And then there's, of course, stitching at the top and the bottom, and then this right here. It's not decorative. This is actually stitching and giving reinforcement to that counter pocket inside. But in a lined boot, especially if it's an internal heel counter, and I think it's because maybe an internal heel counter is not as thick or something, I don't know. But for some reason, it just feels softer and easier when there's lining to break in that heel counter area. So as you can see, every boot has break-in. There is no such thing as a boot that doesn't have break-in. Every boot has to break in. And it's just a matter of whether that is difficult or easy. And whether it's difficult or easy will be determined by how you use the boots, what the shape of your foot is as compared to the shape of the shape of the boot, what kind of leather it is, if it's soft leather or thicker, more rigid leather. All these things are factors, but some boots are really hard. Like my Nix Builder Pros are super thick leather, super dense, super heavy. It's soft, but it's very thick, and they're heavy-duty work boots, right? Whereas my Chrome XL service boots from Viberg, they're just very thin, and so the break-in's not going to be a big deal. But either way, you have to break in your boots because they need to form. So until all of this is shaped by your foot, you can't rightly say that your boots are broken in. Now, if it's easy, you may not even notice any of this is going on, but it is. And so your boots are not broken in until they've formed to your foot. And in my mind, there's two stages of break-in. There's initial break-in and full break-in. Initial break-in is like you've worn them for a few weeks. Maybe you've worn these for like 100 hours or 200 hours, and they've formed your foot well enough to where you don't even notice that they're new boots anymore. So that's initial break-in, where all these things that I've described have happened. But full break-in does not take place. We usually don't think of this, right? 2 years down the road, they're fully broken in. And maybe it's a year down the road. Maybe it's 3 years. I haven't measured that. But at whatever point where they are done changing, there's no more creases being formed. There's no more flex point being determined. There's no more, sole compression or flex point there. The cork is all settled in, the tongue, the lining on the inside, the heel seat, everything's done settling. And it's just so well formed to your foot that it is like a glove. It's like a slipper. At that point, usually we're not even thinking of break-in by then, right? We've long forgotten about buying the boots and breaking them in. We've been using them for a year or two. They just become part of our lives. But at that point, in my mind, maybe that's 500 hours. Maybe that's 1,000 hours. I don't know. But in my mind, the boot is not actually fully broken in until it feels like home, until it feels like a slipper hundreds of hours down the road. So that's when it's fully broken in. So hopefully that demystifies some things for you. I think people often will do all these crazy things to break in boots. There's all these tricks out there, like douse them in alcohol or put the boots on and like walk through the water and get them soaking wet and then let them dry on your feet. There's all these things like that. And I don't know that those things necessarily damage the boots per se, but I just think they're unnecessary and they're kind of excessive. You don't need to do that. I think just wear the boots, and if you understand what is going on with the break-in process, you'll better understand why those things are maybe not as necessary. I would take something with like Bic 4, something that's not going to darken your leather a little bit. If there's like a hot spot, oh, this hurts here, you kind of rub a little bit of that there to soften it up, or take a smooth hard object like a rock or a wooden dowel and go inside and push on it a little bit. I did that with my NYX Builder Pros. There was a spot right here, a seam that was pushing on my foot. I took a rock and got in there and I kind of massaged it a little bit. And yeah, you can always do something like that to make the break-in process easier. But I don't think you need to go all crazy and do this huge process. In fact, if you're in it for patina, maybe you're not, but if you're in it for the patina, the aging that is apparent on the face of the leather, the less you do to the boots at the beginning, the better your patina will be in the long run, and the longer you'll be able to enjoy it. So in my mind, the last thing you want to do if you like patina is go douse it in alcohol or a ton of conditioner, or go get them wet immediately, especially if it's a veg tan leather. You want the boots to just do their thing. They don't need conditioning right from the factory. They're all well conditioned already. They're not going to dry out for months or even years. So I would say avoid all that. Just take a simplistic approach. A lot of that is just kind of hype, and really just wear the boots. Another couple pieces of advice would be wear thick socks. I always wear thick socks, not even just break-in, but always. I always have thick wool socks, not crazy thick, but like medium thickness, and that just creates more insulation between your foot and the boot. So especially in the heel area, it's like thick padding between your heel and the back of the boot there. That's why hikers often wear like thicker socks, because if your skin is rubbing straight on the back of a hard heel counter, well, then your skin is taking all the brunt. But if you've got this like thick wool, it's gonna reduce that a little bit. And I would always recommend wool, by the way. Another piece of advice would be don't rush the break-in process. A lot of times there's this tendency to want to man through it. I've done that when I was in construction, and sometimes I get a pair of boots and I just want them broken in now, right? And so I just press through and end up with blisters and all this stuff. Well, here's why you don't want to do that. Because in the long run, you're actually going to take longer to break in your boots. Because here's how the scenario usually works out. You start breaking in your boots and you start to develop a hot spot right here, and you just press through and you end up with a blister, and it starts bleeding, and then it's super painful. Well, guess what? Now you can't wear those boots for like 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. You have to wait until your blisters are healed before you can start wearing the boots again. Guess what? You just lost 2 whole weeks of break-in just because you didn't want to wait. It's better to just, when they start getting uncomfortable, you just take them off, put them away, and then you wear something else. And then the next day or 2 days later, whenever your foot feels a little better, you put them on again and go as long as you can. And don't let anyone tell you how long that is. If you go 8 hours and you feel, frankly, quite fine, well, good, just keep going. If you can only make it 30 minutes, then that's fine. Take them off and try again later. Fact of the matter is, do what works for you, but don't rush the break-in process. You'll get more done in less time if you don't rush it. It's kind of counterintuitive, but that's how it works. So that's it, guys. Thanks for watching my video about breaking in boots. I hope that helped you understand what's going on better, helps you think more critically about what's going on with your boots when you break them in, answer some questions you have, and leaves you with some tips on how to break in your boots in a more effective way. So as I always say, I appreciate you watching, and always let your boots take you to a place more important than the boots themselves. See you next time, guys. Have a great day.